We are so lucky to have Senator Harriette Chandler here tonight, who represents Worcester in Massachusetts. She's currently the Massachusetts Senate President Emeritus. She's the chair of the Senate Committee on Steering and Policy, vice chair of the Joint Committee on Higher Education, and also co-chair of the Prevention for Health Caucus and co-chair of the legislature's Oral Health Caucus. She has degrees from Wellesley College, go Wellesley, an MBA from Simmons College, so lots of women's education here, and a PhD from Clark University. She's currently in her 9th term in the Massachusetts State Senate. She's previously served on the Worcester School Committee and also the Massachusetts House of Representatives. She's worked her way through various leadership positions, culminating in the Senate presidency last year. She's also very active outside of the State House. So, for example, last year she was president of the executive board of the Women's Legislative Network of the National Conference of State Legislatures. Most relevant to this evening is that Senator Chandler has been a champion of women's rights for decades. Last year, she led the passage of the Nasty Woman Act in Massachusetts, which repealed a 173-year-old abortion ban. It passed unanimously in the Massachusetts Senate and overwhelmingly in the House, a vote of 138 to 9. In this session, she's leading the charge on a bill called the Roe Act, which ensures equitable access to women's healthcare services by removing unnecessary and burdensome provisions that delay and deny care and improve access to affordable care. So please join me in welcoming her here tonight. And Senator Chandler, please take it away.
Start?
Please.
Well, first of all, I want to tell you how delighted I am to be here. And the reason I'm so delighted to come here after spending the day in Boston and now coming here is I feel very passionately about this subject. And if you're thinking about doing what we've done, all I can say is if I could be of any help, I want to be here to do just that. So let me tell you a little bit about our efforts in Massachusetts. First of all, I don't think I have to tell you that access to women's health care services are under constant threat in Washington. And state legislatures, we believe, must act to ensure that women continue to have the right to choose what's best for them. And the time is now. The window is short. The fact that we were able to take this bill and move it so quickly and get a unanimous vote in the Senate and a very substantial vote in the House is a testimony to that. And if we can do it in Massachusetts, you can do it here. So last year we passed the Nasty Women's Act and the Access Bill. We thought that the acronym NASTY would be something that we could all relate to. I don't think I have to explain it to you because I think you're very conscious of it. Let me tell you about both of them. The Nasty Women's Act struck 3 unconstitutional and medically untenable statutes from the Massachusetts general laws. And I understand you too have laws that were put there a long time ago. They stayed there and people said, what difference does it really make? You know, nobody's paying attention to them. Well, now we have to pay attention to them because we don't know what's next. And with Kavanaugh on the Supreme Court, we really don't know what's next. So we have to act. What were these 3 laws? They're very specific. One was an 1800-era abortion ban. One was a mandate that all non-emergency abortions after the 12th week of pregnancy, must be performed in a hospital. Slow the whole process down. Put them all in a hospital. And then finally, a ban on purchasing contraceptions for unmarried couples. Those were the 3 bills. And let me tell you one other thing. We did the same bill the session before, and we got nowhere with it. But last year, in the last term, people were concerned about it and they acted. So I would say the strike while the iron is hot. It's hot right now. So Massachusetts women were protected from these archaic laws thanks to the Supreme Court precedent and precedent set by the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court. However, we needed to pass the Nasty Women Act because we could not trust court precedent to protect vulnerable women from accessing the health care needs. That was something that we were sensitive to, but until the last term, we didn't think it would hit us because we thought we'd always have protection. But we knew, and certainly by the last term, we knew that these protections could no longer just exist on the basis of somebody's goodwill. Rather, they needed to be codified into law. And that's what you must be thinking about. Your laws must be codified. Your bills that have been, sort of hanging out there need to be codified now. Unfortunately, there are state laws across the country that sit like ticking time bombs. And I do not say this to scare you to death, because I think you know it's for real. They are like ticking time bombs that threaten to blow up women's access to health care services. And these laws must be struck down so that they can never be used again and against us. Our access bill was similar, but also very different. And you may have one something like this. Even despite regulations within the Affordable Care Act, women in Massachusetts were still being denied access to their preferred method of birth control. Is that a problem here in Rhode Island? Access to your preferred method of birth control? Long-acting, reversible contraceptives like IUDs and implants were often not covered by Massachusetts insurance plans without what? The copay. You were paying a copay. Our bill ensured that women could access extensive options for contraceptives without paying a copay. So women would not pay a copay, and they would not pay a deduction. The bill even went a step further, and we thought this was very important. First of all, it was any kind of contraception. It was not just a single method of contraception. And what the bill says, it allowed women to purchase a 12-month supply of contraception. 12 months, so that women did not have to pick up their birth control any more than once a year. That women found to be very important, extremely important. Women's health is very important to countless women, and men too. And I'm glad to see some men here, because this makes it all even a much more viable situation. But we are just like Rhode Island. In the Massachusetts legislation, we were concerned. We haven't always had a majority in favor of women's reproductive rights, nor have you. And in Massachusetts, we have, shall we say, some social conservatives who are hesitant to support legislation like the Nasty Women and the Access Bill. We lost one in the last election, and so we're a little more hopeful as we move forward with the Roe bill. However, I am grateful that there are so many legislators who are willing to advocate for women's health care services. And there are so many legislators who are at least, and this is important, willing to listen and consider why women's health care policy is important. And it is. And we cannot let go of the fact that it is important. We're also lucky that our governor, I assume your governor, who's a woman, is supportive of women's health care policy, and that our governor signed the Nasty Women Act and the Access Bill into law. And what is more striking in our case than yours, our governor is a Republican. So we were very fortunate. These bills were good policy, but by passing these laws, we send a message to Washington that our state stands for choice and for women's health. I think this is incredibly important. And I hope that Rhode Island will work to expand women's health care services and do it now. This is the time. This is absolutely the time. People are nervous about it, people are concerned about it, and people who might not even have thought about it before are suddenly thinking, what will happen if what we are seeing in Washington really materializes in its fullest extent? And we know that that's possible. So I hope that Rhode Island will work to expand women's health care services. And I hope that Massachusetts will continue to be a leader in women's health care policy and women's rights by passing another piece of legislation of mine, and that is the Roe Act. I don't know whether you know much about the Roe Act. You're going to know a lot more before this is over, I'm afraid. The Roe Act is what got that governor of Virginia into trouble in the first place, by the way. That was the question of it being. The bill allows the Roe Act allows doctors to provide care in tragic situations where problems arise or a woman's life is at risk late in a pregnancy. Late in a pregnancy. Doctors currently are not able to provide extensive emergency care in these circumstances. Their hands are tied legally. And what we are trying to do with this Roe Act is to untie their hands so that women who are at the tail end of a pregnancy or somewhere through the pregnancy have a chance to have their lives saved, and that for the child's life, for the fetus's life can be saved, or whatever is determined by the doctor. This bill will cover very, very rare, tragic, and heart-wrenching circumstances that nobody wants to be in. I mean, this is not a birth control method, and let no one tell you that it is. But women need appropriate medical care in these circumstances, and the law does not currently allow for comprehensive medical care. It does not allow it in Massachusetts, and probably doesn't allow it in Rhode Island. So we all know that human rights are women's rights, and women's rights are human rights once and for all, and we can't forget that. Human rights are women's rights, and women's rights are human rights once and for all. Please repeat it after me, because it's important that you remember it. Human rights are women's rights, and women's rights are human rights once and for all. So let's live by this motto, and let's legislate by this motto. I've worked hard to expand women's health care services in Massachusetts. We hope that we will do so again by expanding it further with the Roe Act in this legislative session. I'm inspired by all of you. This is really very impressive to see this many people on a Monday night in this facility. And I can only tell you that I know that you're here to champion women's health, and I am truly admiring you and believe that you can do anything that you put your mind to. So thank you very much for having me.
Senator, this is directed to you. I was wondering, how did you deal with the blowback from the religious right and forced birthers and the demands that they put on legislators to deprive women of their reproductive rights?
I think we've been working on that for a very long time. And that issue begins at the ballot place. And I would think that groups who are concerned about this would be very concerned about who is elected in the first place. Because when you let people run for office who you know are very hostile to your interests, you are opening the door to the kinds of problems that you're going to have. I think what we did was just a full court press. And I think the central focus was the executive in Washington, because people understood that if they didn't do something now, sorry about the use of the term, but now makes sense in this, frankly, things were going to only get worse, much worse. And that's what's pushing Roe right now, the fact that we are concerned that things will get much worse. And you know, you never know who is going to be your friend or who is going to be your foe. I had an experience, and I was talking about it today to my aide who's with me today. We were talking about the wife of one of my colleagues. The colleague is a very good, traditional, parochial boy who went to the right Catholic schools and who came from a good Catholic home. And I figured that he was lost to the cause. We would never see any hope. And when his wife took me aside a few months ago and said, "Tell me, your bill, that access bill that you did, I have two daughters, one who's in high school and the other who is in college. Should they be paying a copay and a deductible for their contraceptives?" And I kind of looked at her like, oh my God. I had an ally here. I really had an ally. You just don't know the religious right is being absolutely torn asunder because things are so bad that most people realize that they've got to stand up for what they believe in. And people that you might think were the religious right are not your enemies really anymore. You've got to work as hard with them as you would with anybody else. And I think you might find some changes have occurred. I don't know what the balance is like in the Rhode Island legislature, but it's got to look a lot like ours. It has to. You're next door to us.
You'd be surprised.
Well,
We're the most Catholic state in the country.
all right, I'm not going to try to get into more of that. But I think that we can talk about this afterwards, perhaps. But I think in Massachusetts, the problems of the clergy have undermined so much people's confidence. People who had formerly been really good Catholics, who had been brought up in the Catholic tradition. But I think they're so concerned about what they're seeing happening to their church that I think you will find that they're more open and ready to talk about this now, particularly about contraception. Particularly about contraception. Abortion is another issue. I'm not going to try to tell you it isn't. People see a sharp divide between abortion and contraception. Contraception is the prevention, and abortion, some would say, is the destruction of a fetus. I do not believe that, but I believe that there are those who believe that. And therefore, I think you have to get to know, are you a legislator?
No, I'm
Okay,
not.
well, your legislators
A rabble
and your activists, because that's so important, your activists, they should be making contact with every single member of the legislature and start now and find out where they stand, what they believe in, what motivates them, and do it starting now. I've been involved in this for a long time, and I must tell you that I've seen enormous changes, but I've also seen some switchbacks that worry me. And this is a time where if you don't act when the time is right, you're going to lose that opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you. But what are your thoughts on the Supreme Court blocking Louisiana's abortion law? A good sign or not? Both from the public health perspective and then the legislative perspective.
I must tell you, I feel so strongly about abortion that this is a last resort as far as I'm concerned. The very last resort. People do not use abortions for family planning purposes. They just don't. And it's very hard to tell people from the extreme right that is not true. That is true, rather. They like to get all involved with the 24-week rule. They like to get all involved with the parental consent they make it as difficult as possible. We should not make it difficult. And truly, the Roe Act that we're trying to get through in Massachusetts will make it legal. We at this point, and the nasty women and access is really just playing the margins. We've got to stand up at this point, and I say this to everyone here with all sincerity, and say that in Rhode Island, abortions are legal under the circumstances that you have found. And the Supreme Court, I hope, will not disagree with that. But with Kavanaugh in the Supreme Court, one does not know, and I can only say I'd like to wrap Ruth Bader Ginsburg in bubble wrap, because we can't afford to have yet another Supreme Court appointment by this President of the United States. It's a dangerous, dangerous thing, and we see the writing on the wall.
And I think that's why the current legislation that the governor has supported, codifying in law, in state law, the Roe versus Wade, it's a great thing for Rhode Island to do. And from a public health perspective, one of our core beliefs is that you should not legislate the relationship between a physician and a person and a patient. That is really a relationship that exists within the clinical office. There are circumstances that need to be addressed by the physician and by the patient, and so you cannot legislate that. And so on, from that perspective, I think it's a good thing.
Well, thank you so much to all of you for being here.